The killer didn't leave DNA. The police did. That's what some would later claim. After a case that blurred the line between science and human error, because DNA is supposed to be the most reliable witness. It doesn't lie. It doesn't forget. It doesn't change its story. But what happens when the people collecting that DNA make a mistake? What happens when the truth itself becomes contaminated? November 1st, 2007, in the historic city of Perugia, the night passed quietly. Students filled the streets earlier that evening, laughter echoing through narrow alleyways, unaware that something had already begun to unfold behind closed doors. Inside a modest apartment, a young woman returned home, Meredith Kircher. She was 21 years old, bright, ambitious, living abroad, experiencing a life far from home. But sometime during that night, something changed. A struggle, a moment of fear, and then silence. The next day, her body was discovered. The scene was chaotic, signs of forced entry, disarray, evidence of violence. But the most important thing about that scene wasn't what was visible. It was what would be collected from it. When investigators arrived, they stepped into a space frozen in time. Every surface, every object, every detail had the potential to tell a story. This was where science would take over. Photographs were taken, measurements recorded, evidence bagged prepared. But crime scenes are fragile environments. And from the very beginning, this one would be handled in a way that would later raise serious questions. Investigations are often presented as logical, structured, objective, but behind every decision is a human being. And human beings are influenced by perception. Among those connected to the case was someone who would soon become the focus of global attention, Amanda Knox. Amanda Knox did not respond the way many expected. She was not visibly broken. She did not collapse under the weight of the moment. Instead, she appeared calm, at times even detached. To some, that meant nothing. But to others, it became a reason to question her. Because in moments of tragedy, society expects a certain kind of grief. And when that expectation is not met, suspicion begins to grow. In every investigation, there comes a moment where a theory begins to take shape. It starts quietly, a possibility, a connection, a suspicion, and then it grows. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, the tendency to favor information that confirms what we already believe. Over time, this can evolve into something more dangerous, tunnel vision, a narrowing of focus where alternative explanations begin to disappear. DNA evidence changed modern investigations. It became the gold standard, a silent witness capable of revealing the truth without emotion, without bias. And in this case, it will become the centerpiece. But DNA is only as reliable as the way it is handled. Inside the apartment, investigators began collecting samples. They moved from surface to surface, touching objects, gathering evidence. And in some moments, they failed to change their gloves. One object, then another, each contact, increasing the possibility of transfer. DNA is not static. It can move. from skin to fabric to another surface. This phenomenon is known as secondary transfer DNA. It means that DNA can appear in places where a person has never been. One piece of evidence would later become central to the case, a bra clasp, but it was not collected immediately. Instead, it remained at the scene for 46 days. During that time, the apartment was entered multiple times, each entry increasing the risk. By the time it was finally collected, the scene was no longer untouched. When the results came back, they seemed definitive. DNA linked Amanda Knox to the case. To investigators, it confirmed their theory. To the public, it sounded like proof. But to some experts, it raised concern. Once a conclusion is reached, it becomes difficult to challenge it. Because every new piece of information is interpreted through that belief. Evidence that supports the theory is emphasized. Evidence that contradicts it is questioned. And slowly, the line between fact and interpretation begins to blur. Cases like this remind us that truth is not always as clear as it seems. Sometimes it exists beneath layers of assumption, error, and human judgment. If you're drawn to stories where the truth is hidden beneath the surface, subscribe to Silence of the Truth, because some cases are not just about what happened. They're about how we understand what happened. As the investigation intensified, so did the pressure. Interrogations became longer. Questions became more aggressive. Sleep became limited. And under these conditions, the human mind begins to struggle. This is where the concept of false confession becomes critical. When individuals are pushed beyond their limits, their perception of reality can begin to shift. Memory becomes unreliable. Statements become inconsistent. And what is said may no longer reflect what is true. The case quickly spread beyond Italy. Headlines appeared across the world. And with each headline, a narrative formed. Amanda Knox was no longer just a suspect. She became a story, a symbol, a character. Years later, independent experts revisited the case. They looked at the DNA, the procedures, the collection methods, and what they found raised serious concerns. The evidence may have been contaminated. In the end, the court reached its decision. Amanda Knox was acquitted, not because every question had been answered, but because the evidence could no longer be trusted. Cases like this leave behind more than conclusions. They leave behind questions about systems, about processes, about the fragile nature of truth. But they also leave something else, the opportunity to learn, to improve, to ensure that future investigations are handled with greater care. Because justice is not just about finding answers, it's about protecting the integrity of those answers. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing at a crime scene isn't what the killer leaves behind. It's what others bring with them.